have about 2,300 retail locations, 22 million customers, and about 85,000 employees. And we have about 10,000 of those employees are actually developers. I think it's actually more than that, actually. So hundreds of thousands of endpoints. So we are a very large bank. We have large numbers of developers, thousands of applications, and we're also a very conservative Canadian bank, very conservative. We basically came through the 2008 financial crisis unscathed, which is great, for us. But some of those same conservative principles kind of affect us in the fact that we're really kind of slow, risk-averse, and bureaucratic. So it's really hard for us to get stuff done. One of the things that I was basically, just a little bit about me. I'm currently the head of cyber innovation for TD Bank. I'm actually based over here in Israel. And I have started the TD Innovation Center located here in Tel Aviv. But before that, I was the head of AppSec in TD Bank. And when I got there in 2015, it was a little bit of a mess. This was, and Tanya was talking about the mistakes that companies make and places make. We made a heck of a lot of mistakes. We made almost all the mistakes you possibly could make. And we did spend a great deal of time torturing our developers. It was really one of our favorite pastimes that we did. And I'm going to go through a little bit about what we did and how we our journey basically to get from there to a DevOps ready or DevOps centric sort of environment. And it really didn't take us all that long. It took us about a year to lay the foundation to get things started. But in the beginning, when I first got there in 2015, we were just doing ad hoc security testing of our applications. Only a very small percentage of the apps were being tested at all. We were information security was actually doing the testing, and it was all done at the end of the life cycle. So we really made things very difficult for all the development teams because we were doing pen testing, static scanning, but we had to do it. So the developers couldn't do it, we had to do it. So we became the bottleneck basically for all the testing. So basically, it made it very difficult, very expensive, very slow, and it was not scalable. And obviously for a company basically of our size and scale, this was not something that we could continue to do. I came from Citibank, so I came from a place where it was a lot more mature. So this was a little bit of a, mind-blowing to me when I got to the TD, and it was like, whoa, things are really going backwards here, and we need to really catch up fast. There was a policy like we would tell developers they had published requirements saying you will test your code, but then provided no ability for them to actually do it. So that was a little bit of a problem. We had metrics, but they were often stale and out of date. So nothing worse than telling a development team, yeah, you've got all these vulnerabilities, here's my spreadsheet. Yes, we were using spreadsheets to do that at that time. And then half of the things were wrong. They had fixed those problems, or they were out of date, or something had changed. And so we basically spent a lot of time frustrating our developers. We had a high false positive and duplicate finding rate with the tools that we were using, and very high remediation costs. So this really was not, we basically were essentially starting from the bottom. What we wanted to achieve basically was we wanted to reduce our risk. We obviously wanted to test our applications, especially our highest risk applications. We needed to meet regulatory requirements. We're a heavily regulated bank. We had to meet regulatory requirements in the US and in Canada because we have a very large US presence as well. We needed to reduce the costs of remediation, very expensive. We needed to increase speed and agility as well because we had our development teams were pushing us. They wanted to move more quickly. They wanted to do, and security was like running around, kind of like Tanya's little picture that she had. We're kind of trying to catch things and fix things at the very end of the life cycle, and it was a mess. We really kind of sucked at it, actually. And the goal really kind of was to sort of develop a developer self-service model. That was really where we were headed. We wanted to put a lot of the tools in the hands of the development teams themselves. We needed to have reliable and accurate metrics, and we needed it to be scalable. Obviously, at our size and scale, there was no way we could do this unless we could actually find a way to make it work so that we could deploy it out, across the entire technology area, basically within the bank. And that's tens of thousands of people, 10,000 developers. It was a big undertaking. Most of you might recognize this, the BSIM. We actually did look at BSIM. We kind of found ourselves at this time kind of like here, which was really low on the scale for BSIM. We were really not where we needed to be. And you can see for BSIM, this is just basically the kind of you're looking at comparing yourself to other companies, whether in here it's cloud, financial services, and ISV, vendors and stuff. And pretty much you can see where our competitors were all in green, and we were like kind of really behind there. So we were not really in a very good place in terms of our application security maturity. As Microsoft mentioned already, here's the cost to fix vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities equals money. You have to think of it that way. Every time you have a vulnerability, it's going to cost them something to fix it. If you find it much earlier in the life cycle, if you start to shift left and you move and you fix it much earlier in the life cycle, it's going to be much cheaper to fix it than if you do it later in the life cycle. And that is absolutely true. It's like building a house. If you basically have built the house, you've got everything in, electricals in, and suddenly you find an electrical problem, you have to tear out all the walls. Much easier to find an electrical problem before you close up the walls after you've laid the cabling initially. This was kind of our goal. We weren't doing any of this. We were not automated in the slightest. We were not integrated into the developer tools and processes, and that was our goal. That was what I wanted to see happen. I didn't want us to force ourselves, basically, security basically coming and saying, developers, you shall do this, even though, of course, we still do that. We say we do have that requirement because we're regulated. We have to do it. But we came to the developers, I came to the developers and we're saying, okay, we want to work with you. We want to integrate with your tools. We don't want to be adversarial anymore, because typically the relationship between security and development is extremely adversarial. And that's really what it was at the beginning when we first started. So the whole idea was to basically, what are the developers using? How do we integrate with that? And how do we automate this whole process so that we can be DevOps ready, basically? And yes, actually, believe it or not, we did actually achieve our goals in a year, and I'll kind of show you kind of how we did it. I'll give you some advice and practical advice, because no matter what's the size of your organization, if an organization the size of ours and as bureaucratic as ours can do something like this, so can you. So can any company, basically. And it's basically building a culture of security. You need to, and as again Microsoft said, it's everybody's job. It's not just security's job. Everybody's job is about security, because you do not want to be that developer who caused that vulnerability, who caused that breach. You don't want to be that person, honestly. As much as we don't want to blame people, big companies and things like that, we'll tend to root you out and find you. We don't want to, and also identify people who are repeated offenders and things like that. So as much as I want to get away from the culture of blame, so I don't like that. I think it's a bad way to do things, but you don't want to be that person, because it is everybody's responsibility, and you're the ones coding, you're the ones on the front lines. If you're not doing it right, I'm not going to be able to fix it. There's too much at stake, and there's too many, potential problems that are happening. We did purchase and roll out a whole new suite of security tools, and when I did this, I actually used the developers. I had what we called security ninjas. We refer to them as security ninjas, our developers who are really security minded. We had them participating in the POCs, in the proofs of concept, so they could actually give us real-time feedback on the tools that we were going to use. So I selected tools that they helped me select. So I wasn't just imposing my view on them, I was actually having them help me. We rolled out a whole developer secure coding training program, very language specific. So it was very specific. You don't have to sit there and listen to the same, kind of very high level, boring training. It's actually specific to your language and specific to what you were doing. We were able to do this across all of our different lines of businesses and across all the development teams and integrate them into their process. And we did it without a huge amount of pushback from the CIOs, which my boss even said is like, I haven't heard anything from anybody that's bad. So I'm like shocked, because usually you'll get, everything will bubble up to the other CIOs and everybody will start freaking out, and then, it gets worse from there. But we did start it in like November 2015. And by December 2016, we had rolled all this out, and we had teams actually using the tools. So again, it is possible to do this and to do this correctly. We set up a new enterprise governance process. We did baseline penetration tests. Penetration testing is the one thing not really scalable. You really want to focus on things that are very critical when you're dealing with penetration testing, because it's not such a scalable commodity, it's very manual. And then we had the app dev teams doing the testing and using the testing tools themselves. And we did, again, the mandatory secure coding training. We set up best practices, basically, how and when to test and how frequently you're supposed to test. What is the right way to do this? And we had training sessions, basically, with all the developers and how to make this happen. Now, I want to kind of go through just quickly, what are the key takeaways, the key lessons learned from this, basically, in terms of what we made a lot of mistakes as we went through this, but these are the things that we learned as we went through it. Number one, communication is key. You have to communicate with your development teams and with upper management. You need the CIOs and the people who are at the top of the level of the organization, whether it's big or small, push it down from the top in order to get the developers to understand this is something you have to do. But you also need to talk to the dev leads and the developers themselves to understand, what are your problems? What are your pain points? What are your pet peeves? What are the things that are driving you crazy about security? What are we doing that's really annoying you that we can stop and make it better? And I was able to have a lot of different discussions with them, because it's something that's really near and dear to my heart, just to understand how developers think, how they work, and then basically we come to you. We come into your environment. If you're using Jira, we'll use Jira. If you're using Jenkins, we'll use Jenkins. So that's really kind of how we want to work this. For security teams specifically, you have to talk to developers and not be adversarial. You can't. You have to ask them about what's going on. You have to ask them their opinions. You want to make sure that you're using more carrot than stick. Yes, you have to use the stick sometimes, but developers are people. They get discouraged. If you constantly tell them that their code sucks, they're not going to talk to you. So you have to tell them, also acknowledge what they're doing well. Tell them what they're doing right, and reward good behavior. Reward the teams that are doing it really well. And for the developers, as I mentioned, you don't want to be that developer. So work with your security teams. They want to actually help you. Sometimes they can be obnoxious and rude. I agree. but for the most part, they want to help you and support you in what you're doing. So try to work together. The most important thing, because my model is a very developer-centric model. I want to understand how the developers think. I want to, as a security person, I want to come into that, and I want to help you do your job and help you learn how to code securely. And I want to do it together and not in an adversarial way. It really is, as I mentioned, we got developer-friendly tools. The developers helped us select the tools. And the best tools are the ones that are closest to the developer. There's one that we refer to, I'm not going to tell you the company name, even though I think they're here. But it's sort of a spell check for security. And it runs in the IDE. So the closer you get to the developer, the better it's going to be, and the better it's going to operate. And we don't even, with this particular tool, we didn't even monitor it. We just wanted them to adopt it. We wanted them to use it. So we didn't even check to see, you weren't even being counted if you had findings, because it helps them early on, early in the life cycle as they're coding, to find vulnerabilities and to figure out what's wrong with their code. And it actually really helps to get it into the day-to-day routine, because that's the critical piece, is getting it into the day-to-day developer routine and making it part of your normal day-to-day life cycle. It's not, security bugs are just like your normal defects that you find in your code. It needs to be treated the same way. It's all part of the same process. Don't try to separate it. It needs to all be handled together. You need to encourage the developers to scan early, scan frequently, and the tools need to be fast, really fast. So you need to use tools that are going to be able to scan quickly, get them responses quickly, so they can get the feedback they need and fix their code early. And the security attitude adjustment is to re-emphasize that. We have to come to them. We need to come to the developers into your environment. We need to have an attitude adjustment. We're not, all powerful, all knowing, and basically from on high, from the mount on high, basically saying, "Thou shalt do this." You shall code securely, and then just walking off and saying, "You're on your own, figure it out." But we need to work with you and help you as developers to do it right. And I mean, with the security ninjas especially, we provided the support for the teams. I always made a point of hiring these security ninjas. If I could find one, I hired them so that they could then talk to developers. I find developers talking to developers is far more effective than the security people talking to developers. Sometimes we just talk like this, but developer to developer, they can get it, And we also did use our red team and our pen testers. We showed the developers, how, I had them go off and describe to the teams, like, this is how the bank can be hacked. We'd actually take real world examples from our own code and say, this is what can happen to you, if a hacker gets a hold of you, if you don't fix these vulnerabilities. This is what can happen to the bank. This is what can happen to you. So it made it very real, very clear. And the red team also, which we had established, the red team also was remarkable because we could actually show them this is all the stuff that we can find, and this is the stuff that you need to fix. So that made it very real, and it helped them to understand. We also established a developer AppSec council for the developers to talk amongst themselves and to help share ideas and to vent even. Sometimes it's just venting. Sometimes they just literally need a place to vent. If they want to vent about security, come and vent. I don't care. I can take it. I can take it. Vent all you want, and if I can fix it, I will. But I'll do whatever I can to listen to you and to fix it. You also need to have very clear policies and standards and keep it really simple. If you make your policies and standards too complicated, no one's going to understand it and no one's going to do it. So you need to keep it very simple. You need to make sure they're clear about what applications are in scope, what ratings of the findings are in scope, they have to be fixed and when, and you have to be very lenient at the beginning with, fixing things. Give them the extra time they need to fix the findings. Because sometimes, it just, as they're getting used to this and as they're adjusting to this kind of new world where they also are responsible for security, they're also responsible for this, it's a total culture shift and a total mind shift. So, it's not an easy thing to adjust to. I had pushback even from security, basically, at our bank saying, this isn't going to work. How can this work without security really driving it? But I really, I was actually amazed at how quickly, people kind of got it and how quickly people were able to, the developers even were able to start taking it on and doing these things themselves. It was really, I was really quite amazed. Reliable and accurate metrics are critical. If you don't tell your developers what to do, what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, and it's not right, they're going to get frustrated and they're not going to do it. They're going to say, I can't rely on what you're telling me, so I'm not going to do anything. So accuracy is critical, or they're going to ignore your reports. A little public shaming goes a long way. Don't do too much of that. It's very discouraging. Again, just re-emphasize that. You want to be as encouraging as possible to your development teams. You don't want to have an IS person in scalability ever get between a developer and his or her code deployment. Big recipe for disaster. You want to basically put as many of the tools in the hands of the dev teams, give it over to them as much as possible. Otherwise, you're never going to make it to DevOps. You're just never going to get there. It's because you need to make sure developer self-service and being able to automate as much as possible. This is the way things have to be. And even a big company like us, we could make this happen. And we've actually made a lot of progress even from this time in terms of our DevOps pipeline and how this is all working. So we do have integrated tools into the developer tooling themselves. So all of our security testing tools are integrated into what they're doing. We have tools that also tell them what security requirements based on their code. They'll analyze their code and basically say, okay, you have this kind of application, this kind of thing. You need to have these security requirements. And we tell them up front what the security requirements are so that they're not like coming to the end of their life cycle and suddenly, oh, they get hit with, oh, you're using the wrong kind of authentication. You're screwed up your encryption. You did, So we're telling them at the beginning so they know at the beginning, and then they can fix it and get it working and not have to worry about it at the end. We did also tune our tools. Very important to tune the tools to make sure you're eliminating false positives, eliminating duplicate issues and stuff. Those are one of the key things. And arguing with the developers about the findings ends up being a little bit of a problem. That was one of our key issues, and it's still a little bit of a problem, but we had our vendor kind of take over some of that, and that made it go along a lot faster. Again, getting IS kind of out of the pipeline. Because the more we're in there, the slower things will go for sure. Now this is some last little things to talk about here. You want to start small, but plan big. Don't try to boil the ocean. We started with 200 applications and grew from there. Again, we have thousands of applications. I do believe that all code going out the door should be tested, mainly because you really don't, when you think about it, do we really have true perimeters anymore? Not really. You know, you have cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud, private cloud. You've got endpoints everywhere. You know, you have to think in terms of not having a perimeter. You have to protect everything, because anything could potentially be an open door into your network and into your applications. You do have to prioritize. Not every application is critical. So you have to basically make decisions about what's important and what's not important, and what do you focus on, what do you don't focus on. And don't necessarily, pull all the, you don't want to throw out the stops, pull out the stops for on a lower level, a lower rated, lower criticality application, where meaning you're not finding as many vulns. You want to keep it lower, just find the high risk stuff for lower risk stuff. But with the big ones, with the ones that are especially our internet-facing banking applications, we got to find it all. We got to find it all, because we are constantly under attack. As I'm sure anybody who's, any bank is going to be constantly under attack. Not every project is DevOps. Not every project has to move fast. So sometimes you can go slower. It's okay to move slower, especially if something's really critical and really sensitive. It is okay to move slower. So you have to be able to make priority decisions about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And lastly, it's an ongoing, iterative process. It's constantly changing. So, and I know we have to move, that's that phrase, move at the speed of business. We have to move at the speed of our developers. We were pushed, security was really pushed, we were literally dragged along, because we needed to, in terms of doing this kind of work, because we had to keep up with them. We were being left in the dust, waving a flag saying, hey, there's a problem here, but the developers were way up there. We couldn't catch up to them, so we had to change, we had to adapt, and we had to come into their world in order to make this really happen. So that's kind of, what our journey was. It was not an easy journey by any means. It was a really tough journey. It was really hard. We got some pushback from the development teams. We got even some pushback from the security teams. It's how can this really work? But I really do truly believe, and I'm very passionate about this, especially at my former job and even what I'm doing right now. It's you have to work together. You have to work in combination with each other. You can't be adversarial anymore. And there's just too much at stake in this world. There's just too much at stake in the way things are happening, how quickly things can happen. One breach can sink a company. You've seen it happen. So, you have to be, and especially with a bank, we have to protect money. We have to protect customer data. We have too much at stake to take this lightly, and we take it very seriously. And we need all of our developers and all of our teams to take it seriously as well. And I can tell you just from experience, having done this, it can work, it can happen, and you can get the developers, and all the developers and the security people can actually work together on this stuff. And I think it's a really critical piece of the puzzle, because if we waste so much time and energy when we're fighting with each other, when we should be working together on this stuff. And again, it's really very much possible. So I think that's pretty much it. Kind of wanted to run through it fairly quickly because I know we're kind of at the end of the day. But any questions? I would always love to hear war stories. I always like to ask developers and people, or even security people, whoever, if you have war stories, problems, Yeah. Well, there's a number of ways you can do it. One of the things we like to do is have somebody really high up, two levels above me, basically, are some of our EVPs, give rewards to the development teams, financial rewards, as well as encouragement, and do it very publicly so that they're very aware, that yes, look what these guys did, they did a great job, and this is what they did, and here's the reward for it, that kind of thing. So we also do have, TD is very custom, employee focused, so we also do giveaway trips and other, other stuff. We're a little crazy with our employees, but we love our employees. Yes. Yeah. For this, literally that, I probably should tell you what the tool was, but the security spell checker tool is great. You know, it's synopsis, but it used to be Sigital, you know, but it actually is integrated directly into the ID of the developer. So as they're coding, literally as you're coding, it highlights it like almost like a spell check. Oh, you got a security problem here. And so basically, as you're coding, it tells you that, so it's like a training tool, but real time. So it's like you can't get any better than that, really. So it's one of the really excellent tools that you can use. And there's another tool that we used, SD Elements, that really tells you, well, you just put in a whole checklist of stuff about your application, and then it gives you all the security requirements that you have to fulfill. And you can do that immediately before you've written a line of code. So these are all things you can do to kind of help your development teams to know what they have to do at the very beginning, you know. And also talk to your developers, talk to them, get your little focus groups, talk to them, encourage them. They're people, they need encouragement. So, any other questions? All right. Oh, one more.
Thanks again. Is there a direct responsibility for development on the team and your local units, or is this responsibility for secure development on you?
Well, we have mandated the program, but we produce metrics and reports for the CIOs and for the head of the company, you know, basically saying who's compliant and who's not. So there is a little bit of public shaming that goes on at the CIO level. So at the CIO level, they see, oh, my people aren't complying. So then they'll go and talk to their development teams and go do that. So we are responsible for publishing, you know, who's doing what, and then we kind of use the the CIOs to go down and kind of step on their people when they have to. But more than that, we really want to make, and part of it also is with the training, you have to make sure it's also in smaller tidbits. Developers don't have a huge amount of time, as we well know. So you want to give them more specific, you know, training that isn't necessarily an hour or two long. It might be 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, you know, stuff that they can take in a break here and there. So it's like you need to kind of, and very, very specifically apropos for them also. You can't have it be general. It's not very, they don't consider that very interesting. They get bored. So, okay. Anything else? Yes.
Some companies want to move fast, blow the alarm, and that can cause security problems.
Yes. Right.
Is there something that what can be done by the company in order to not create constantly security problems?
Well, part of it is making sure your developers are trained, because we found that there was also constant repetition of the same flaws over and over again. So like cross-site scripting was constant everywhere, and the same developers would do the same thing over and over again. So if you have focused training, you teach them, okay, we see this trend here in this development team. We need you to focus on this, you know, because you're coming up, you have your cross-site scripting vulnerability, you got it out the wazoo here. You need to fix it. And so you train them, you teach them, and you get them to do it, you know. So you can, and they can rerun the tests themselves. They don't have to come to us. You know, we just see the reports and publish the reports. But you can start training them. So they have to understand what secure coding means, what it is, and how it affects them. They have to, you know, they have to start to really make the correlation between I'm coding this, and I want to cut some corners here, but maybe I shouldn't do that, because if I do this, then that's going to lead to this vulnerability. And then guess what that red team person is going to do? Or worse yet, a hacker. You know, you don't want to be the one that gets caught by the red team. So.
At what level do you have devs that also write their own testing?
We haven't done that yet. So where they're writing their own testing. They do code reviews and things like that, but we don't have them write their own testing. We still control the testing, but we expect their feedback, you know, especially for basically we have to, you know, get the tools, you know, tuned so that we're not continuously coming up with the same problems over and over again that aren't really problems. So we haven't gotten there yet, so. Anything else? All right, thank you guys.